The following program has been pre-recorded, so please don't call in at this time. If you wish to participate in the program, tune in at 5 p.m. every Wednesday for A Pause for Thought on Baton Rouge Community Radio. Good evening, fellow humans. This is Wayne Parker with A Pause for Thought here on Baton Rouge Community Radio, 96.9 FM here in Baton Rouge. Well, we are glad to have you here with us tonight. By we, I mean me and Lang Baker. Lang, glad to have you here.
Good to be here again, Wayne.
And I'd like to remind all of our listeners that this is a live call-in show. The number to call is 343-9927, 343-9927, and our topic of the evening is the Great Garbage Patch, and actually it's patches. We're talking about all the trash that collects in our oceans, and as I understand it, well, the first thing I heard about was the Great Garbage Patch, which is in the North Pacific. And I guess it stretches, it's like, what, 2 times the size of Texas, or about the size of Russia is what you said.
Well, what I was reading, there's varying estimates about its size depending on how you define it, but estimates range from the size of Texas to the size of Russia, which is like from something like 270,000 square miles up to close to 6 million square miles.
Yeah, it's big. And as you pointed out, there's trash all throughout the oceans. It's just more concentrated in these patches. Now, what, you might ask, are these trash patches? Where are they? What are they caused by? I'm looking at a map here, and I see 5 different patches in the oceans, and they make sense. There's the Northern Pacific Gyre, it's called. That's the G-Y-R-E. It's pronounced Gyre. I looked that up. Which is the one you're talking about. It's anywhere from the size of Texas all the way up to the size of Russia, and it extends all across the North Pacific, really, from Japan on down to California, really. Then there's the South Pacific Gyre, and then a North Atlantic Gyre, South Trash Patch, sorry. Now that I got that word in my head. The South Atlantic one, and there's one in the Indian Ocean, and I think you mentioned before we went on the air that there's also a possibility that there's a patch in the Gulf of Mexico, too.
Well, what I was saying, they weren't speaking of it as a patch so much as the same characteristics of the patches as a high level of pollution from plastics, which is mainly what the main concern is, although there are other kinds of trash out there.
Yeah, there's
as
lots,
well.
Right. Yeah, and what they, basically what it is all the human waste trash. Let me quibble a little bit with the name Garbage Patch. And I looked this up. There's a difference between garbage and trash. Garbage is normally used to refer to wasted or spoiled food or other refuse, whereas trash is rubbish or waste or refuse, litter. So really, these should be called the trash patches or the trash vortices, maybe. I was having some fun with the names here. The trash spirals and the rubbish patches. That one, I think that was my favorite, the rubbish patches. But these are formed by ocean currents and the winds, right?
That's what they say when the stuff I've been reading about it, and that's what forms them. And since, like the definition, what we mean by the patch or the garbage or the trash or whatever, the sense I was getting out of what I was reading is basically what they're talking about are greater and lesser concentrations of these various kinds of pollutants, that they tend to get more concentrated where the currents and the winds bring into these vortices.
Right, it just
bring whatever's
them
out there, so they become more concentrated.
It concentrates them, yeah. And according to this National Geographic article I have here, there's a paragraph that states, for many people, the idea of a garbage patch conjures up images of an island of trash floating on the ocean. In reality, these patches are almost entirely made up of tiny bits of plastic or microplastics? I mean, all the images we see on TV are of turtles or other sea animals tangled up in fishing nets or six-pack containers, and the like. But the majority of, according to the National Geographic, are these microplastics that they don't create so much an island of trash, but a cloudy soup, they call it, a cloudy soup, in that area.
That's what I was reading too. I guess it depends on where you want to focus your attention on the problems of waste plastic or plastic that gets out into the environment or into the oceans. And if you're looking at the impact on the food chain, then it's more of these smaller plastic. If you're looking for the problems that it causes for higher wildlife like the sea turtles and the birds, then it's not that microscopic level of small particles we're talking about. It's more the larger plastic items that are mistaken by turtles as being a jellyfish when they from a plastic bag.
Plastic bag,
the birds that are eating pellets that are visible to the
and you mentioned
eyes.
something about the micro pellets that the birds, the albatross was mentioned in the article I read. They mistake it for fish eggs. And you were saying that these micro... Well, go ahead.
Well, yeah, those are like plastic pellets, but then there's what's called micro beads of plastic, which are microscopic. You can't see those with your eyes, but they were common additives to toothpaste and cosmetics and various other industrial products that were intentionally put there as small pieces of plastic. But I think they were banned in the U.S. starting a couple of years ago. So they're no longer in the production chain, but
in America,
they have called. Yeah, I don't know what the rest of the world's doing about it, but they were causing this problem, or contributing to the problem that comes from this very small, microscopic size particles of plastic. Another that when they started looking, some of the researchers started looking for the amount of microbeads in the environment and discovered there was a whole lot more microfibers than microbeads, and the microfibers are what come off of fabrics, synthetic fabrics, and a lot of that gets into the oceans through the discharge from washing machines.
Sure.
Every time you wash polyester or rayon or some other synthetic fabric, piece of clothing or blanket or whatever, out the waste stream go these microfibers that end up out there.
Must have been quite a spike in the volume back in the 70s then, huh?
Well, it's even getting worse. They're saying, like polyester production is going to double in the next few years because of the large number of people, and so they're producing clothing from the synthetic fabrics. And that's why they found a large concentration of in the Gulf when they were doing some research projects around the Gulf Coast and the Gulf waters looking for microbeads, and lo and behold, there's a whole lot more microfibers than microbeads.
Well, sure, I guess, because all of the Mississippi River and a lot of lesser waterways all drain to the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah, there's some research headquartered at LSU that's doing this, and there's also other research that is looking at the coast all the way from the southern Texas border around to the Keys in Florida. And they're finding that some of the concentrations here in the Gulf are as bad as what they are out in the Great North Pacific Garbage Patch.
Yeah, or the other four that are out there. But, it's interesting, you mentioned the Gulf of Mexico and how high the concentrations of microfibers and all are in the Gulf. We made a big deal about the BP oil spill, which was a big deal, of course. But why aren't we making a big deal over this other stuff? And I guess I have my own reasons for that. But people can't see it; they don't notice it. So I guess it's not a big problem. I don't know.
Yeah, and then also when there's a big disaster that happens at one moment, it gets a lot more media attention than when it's long term.
Generates viewership.
Plugging away at destruction.
Yeah, that stuff is boring, I guess. That doesn't appear to be an immediate danger, so,
at least those who decide what gets media attention think it's boring.
This is true. But I guess the biggest problem is the solid waste is bad, of course, because it tangles up marine animals. I remember reading a story about a whale that was drowning or suffocating or whatever you want to call it because it was tangled up in a fishing net and it couldn't swim, it couldn't do anything. But it's these microplastics, I think, that they say, and fibers that you mentioned, that I guess cause the biggest problem because it creates a cloudy soup, which, number one, all marine animals are going to eat in some way because it's in the water they live in. I mean, if we have something in our air, it becomes a part of us when we inhale it. So I would imagine the fish and all the other marine animals have it. So if we eat those fish, we have it in us, and it's going to affect everything.
Right, and in addition to the plastic, you've got the toxic chemicals that it breaks down into, which get ingested into the lower parts of the food chain and work their way on up. And then you've got those small plastic particles also absorb toxins that are out there already.
Yes. And
concentrate them. And so that gets concentrated into the food chain. So
that's
more
right.
than just the plastic itself.
Yeah, that was mentioned in one of the articles I read just recently. They say, well, it looks like it has an upside because these microplastics absorb toxins, but if we end up eating them anyway, that's not really an upside. But probably aren't many upsides when you're talking about the number of people we have consuming things on this earth. I'd like to remind the listeners, you're listening to Wayne Parker and Lang Baker here on A Pause for Thought. We're talking about the great trash vortices in the world, or in our oceans, garbage patches they are normally referred to. 343-9927 if you'd like to call in and add your 2 cents or a buck or whatever. 343-9927. We'd like to hear from you. Well, Lang, one of the other problems I noticed before we move off of plastic, because really one of the other problems with the microplastics creating the cloudy soup toward the surface of the ocean is that it filters out sunlight, which is necessary for some of the lower level, the algae and whatnot that feed the lowest levels of marine life. So those things die, and there we go. You know, if you're losing the basic fundamentals of the bottom of the food chain, you're going to be toast someday.
Right. So it has impact beyond just consuming it.
Yes. Hang on, we got a call here. Good evening. You're on the air with A Pause for Thought. Let me know who's calling, please.
Yes, this is Mike.
Yeah.
I'm enjoying your discussion so far. Responding to something you said a moment ago is to asking the question, why don't people pay attention? I just thought I'd point out that back during Reagan's, I believe it was Reagan's presidency, he had Dr. Watts, who was I believe it was the Secretary of the Interior, who in a congressional hearing said, well, we don't have to worry about the environment. Jesus is coming, it's no big deal. And we have a current president plays off of that same nonsense and is willing to cut the enforcement EPA programs by 31% in his current budget proposal. So the fact that in Louisiana you got 80-something% of the people in the state voted for Trump, that tells me that most people just don't give a rat whatever because it's not in their worldview. That it's not important to them.
Yeah, it's a liberal conspiracy, probably something like that, or a Chinese hoax.
Conspiracy, just the way people are socialized, the way they learn what's important and what's not important.
Good point. Yes, indeed. And I'm not hopeful, but who knows? Maybe.
Well, they got to keep banging the gun. Thank you for banging the gun.
Yeah, at least we're doing the easy part and getting the word out there.
Yeah.
All right, thanks. Anything else, Mike? Nope, he's gone. Yeah, that's obviously the problem. It's interesting he mentioned that we are socialized that way. Unless we're inclined to look for this information, we don't know about it. And that's one of the things that I realized some years back with the rise of the fair and balanced television network, if all you're doing is watching TV, you're not informed. You know, if you think that being informed only involves watching a television show or television network, then you're missing the mark by a great deal. But I guess we're just odd that way. I mean, we're not the only ones, of course, but I've always been curious about stuff. And anyhow, we were talking about plastics blocking out the sunlight. And let's see, we're consuming all of it. Did we mention how much was on the bottom? Or, I know they do theorize that if we've got a bunch of trash accumulating in these vortices on the higher, places in the ocean, that there's probably going to be a lot of stuff on the bottom, too. Stuff that sinks. As a matter of fact, I think I do have a number for that, but you go ahead and look, too, if you would, Lang. No, I don't have it readily available here, and I don't want to bore everybody any worse than we probably already are.
Well,
sitting here looking
considering
for
the diversity of the kind of plastic that's out there, at the two extremes we got these micropellets and microfibers, but then there are also fishing nets miles long that are abandoned out there. That
they just left
cut and
out
left.
there,
Yeah, and so they've got like phantom nets or phantom.
They call it ghost fishing.
Ghost
when
fishing.
Fish get caught up in these nets and then die because they can't function properly.
Right.
But I'm thinking about other things, other garbage, other refuse besides plastic that gets kicked out there. But I guess the biggest problem with the plastic is they don't go anywhere. They don't ever disappear.
Well, there was mention of containers coming off of container ships in storms.
Oh.
And like loads of Nike shoes and little rubber duckies and things like that that had been found washed up on shore from some container that had gone off a ship out in the middle of the ocean. So
yeah, I guess over
there are
time,
large scale items get out there in the garbage patch too.
Yeah. Okay, well, what's being done? Well, did we talk about the sizes? Oh, yeah, we did talk about a little bit with the sizes, a little bit of the sizes. What are some of the efforts that you found that are being made to reduce the amount of garbage that ends up, plastic garbage that ends up in the oceans?
Well, from what I was reading, the only effective way to deal with it is to prevent it from getting there in the first place.
Oh, you like this one article I read that said keep plastics away from oceans and rivers?
Like stop making the stuff.
Oh, that's what you meant. Yeah, actually, there's an article that I found, I think you found something too, that was in the Irish Examiner that says exactly that. It says we're trying to focus on the consumers when it's the producers of plastics that are killing us. What have you got on that?
Well, it says, just to give you an idea of the scale, they project by 2025, just a few years away, there will be 3 tons of fish for every 1 ton of plastic in the waters, and by 2050, the ratio of fish to plastics will be 1 to 1. So there'll be just as much plastic in the ocean as there are fish in the ocean.
And if we eat the fish, we'll live longer, right?
I wouldn't want to volunteer for that blind study.
No. But yeah, so it's getting worse, and that's what this article here says. They're producing it so much, and we can't recycle it fast enough. For one thing, that's another aspect of it we didn't talk about, was how America for a long time was solving its problem with trash plastic, stuff that we could not recycle. We would sell it to China in billions of tons or whatever, millions of tons every year. And that was solving our problem, but a lot of that was getting wasted and dumped in unauthorized places in China. And so the Chinese government put a huge restriction on importation of these plastics. Plus, they're probably generating their own right now, as their economy grows. So now I just heard a story recently where after China restricted it, we went to Thailand and began selling it to them, and then they put a restriction on it, and then Malaysia, the same thing. So now we're running out of places to sell it to. And I think you mentioned before we went on the air that we're producing plastic. Was it the supply of plastic was greater than demand, or?
Yeah, this was a criticism of the idea that you could solve the problem by going and gathering all that plastic out there in the ocean and then recycling it, which has a number of problems with it. One of the big ones is
you can't.
There's, yeah. Well, how are you going to gather all these microfibers of plastic and try to recycle those when you have to sort it by what type of plastic it is?
Good point.
And you've got to clean it so it doesn't have all these pollutants contaminating it.
Yep.
But then, apart from that, it's so broken down that it's not of high enough quality to be an input for recycling. But regarding the demand, they're saying they're producing so much of it that, well, there's some facts here about just the demand for plastic bottles.
Oh,
for
yeah,
water.
yeah. Yeah, well, I don't want to... Do you have it right there in front of you? Or?
Well, there's some information about plastic bottles from this factoid website called Beachopedia.
Ah, okay.
But it says it requires 3 liters of water to produce each 1 liter of bottled water.
Yeah,
So,
great.
and the production of these water bottles per year requires equivalent more than 17 million barrels of oil.
Great, yeah. Well, that's something else. I mean, recycling generates its own waste, of course, and getting back to the quality of the plastics and recycling, I wanted to touch basically on a couple of other approaches that have come up with the problem with trash bags. Hang on, we gotta get on the call here. Good evening, you're on the air with a pause for thought. My man, know who's calling, please.
It's Mike again with another thought.
Okay. I'm glad you're thinking.
I'm glad that your partner in crime there brought up the issue of biofilm. That it is a big problem in trying to recycle ocean suspended plastics, because the biofilm grows on the surface, and then you have other creatures living in the mass of the of the biome there, various vertebrates and invertebrates, and so I'm sure that a significant portion of the fish biomass is going to get mixed up in, or whatever organisms going to get mixed up in that plastic. And it's not just a matter of washing it off. They're going to be all tangled up in there, and you're just generating another waste stream.
Yeah.
With respect to the, it's really interesting to me that our current culture continues to do the same thing that the English did with their royal charters. We give corporations these go forth and make money orders, and then they start buying up congressmen and such to limit their responsibility and cleaning up the messes they basically generate.
Right.
I'm wondering if down the road it gets so bad that we're going to have a new version of CERCLA for ocean plastics. CERCLA was the law that was passed to force prior owners of abandoned waste sites or contaminated sites to clean them up. And maybe we ought to be taxing and revising CERCLA to include, if you're a plastics generator for this period of time, you can't show that you're doing 100% recycle on your plastics to cause zero net damage, then you're going to have to pay the pipe and get stuff cleaned up.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree, but we've tried other things as far as raising taxes on pollutants like the carbon tax, and that was shot down by the media machine. I think it'd be a pretty tough row to hoe, but I agree with you, Mike, on that.
Yeah, well, remember these things come in 40 and 50-year cycles. The Silent Spring, Rachel Carson,
Right.
Earth Day movement of the 60s and 70s kicked off a 30-year cycle of increased regulation, and now we're seeing the pendulum swing the other way, and we're probably going to get to a nadir pretty soon. And it'll get
swing
bad
back.
enough at some point. It'll swing back, I hope, if we don't kill ourselves in the process first.
Yeah, some other way, right. Okay, Mike, thank you. Yeah, something I wanted to get to also in ways of addressing it. Of course, addressing production is the biggest thing, but there have been a couple of attempts. Well, before I forget it, there was one attempt so far, fairly recent, to collect all or begin collecting all of the trash in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And it was by towing a flexible boom behind a boat and hoping to scoop it up and then draw it out or whatever on conveyor belts, and it didn't work. And my thinking was that if the majority of the pollutants are microplastics, this boom wouldn't do any good anyway. But in its defense, it would at least get out the bulk stuff, which is eventually going to degrade into these microplastics more than likely, right? I think they call it photo degradation or whatever, that the sun
Right.
breaks it down.
Right.
So, but still there's been an attempt to clean it out, but it would take, I think they said 67 shiploads a year to collect it all and get it out of there.
I think that was to collect 1% of it.
Well, really 1%, great. So, yeah, we got a problem there. Maybe they can come up with an additive to the oceans that would dissolve. No, never mind.
Yeah, like an additive to the sky to protect from global warming. Right?
Yeah, well, yeah, or blowing up, setting off high explosives in the eyes of hurricanes to get rid of them. Yeah, what could go wrong with that, right? But anyway, there have been some people, two people or areas of thought that have created bioplastic shopping bags, and one was. This is from the Legal Reader, and it's an Indonesian entrepreneur who came up with a way to make shopping bags out of the cassava plant. And it's can be dissolved in water. No, the cassava bags degrade quickly, they say, in when they're exposed to the elements, but they don't do so well, from what I understand, in landfills or at the bottom of the ocean. But that's one idea, though. It would dissolve in the water or degrade quickly. And there was another one that's called a bioplastic that was created by a Chilean businessman in conjunction with Chinese. And this is made of modified polyvinyl alcohol, PVA, which, according to this article here from China Daily, comes from natural gas and calcium carbide. And the one Chinese man that is pushing it demonstrated the safety of it by dissolving one of these bags and then drinking it in a glass of water. But I can't help but think that, if you're going to dissolve this stuff, it's not going to go completely away, because it's not made of oxygen or hydrogen. It's going to stay in there somewhere. So we end up with the same problem.
I guess the question are what are the constituents it breaks down into?
Yeah, and I couldn't find that. But if it comes from natural gas and you're not burning it, I would think, well, maybe, I don't know. But,
Well, I heard, and this may be an urban myth, but I heard somewhere a few years ago about some outfit that come up with a plastic to wrap food with, that the plastic itself was edible. So you just plop it in its wrapper in the microwave and then eat the whole thing without unwrapping it.
Well,
Maybe the solution's somewhere in there, huh?
maybe so. I do believe they make... I'm not going there. Never mind.
Well, there
yeah.
are cultures that they wrap their food in edible wrappers. They call them grape leaves.
Yeah, tortillas.
Well, there's
Not tortillas, not tortillas. What are they? It's a Mexican food. It's wrapped in a corn leaf. I can't think of the name.
Tamales are wrapped in
Tamales, there
corn
you go.
husks, but I
Corn
don't
husks.
think you eat the husk there.
I always do.
I think George Bush tried to do that. The first elder George Bush on
Oh,
the campaign trail tried to eat a tamale without unwrapping it.
And he wasn't even the stupid one. But anyway, well, Lang,
And he was supposedly a Texan, so he should have known about tamales, you'd
oh,
think.
come on, he was a rich Texan. Anyway, I think we're out of time, Lang, and this has been a fun one tonight. Hopefully everyone listening has enjoyed it. You've been listening to Wayne Parker and Lang Baker here on A Pause for Thought on Baton Rouge Community Radio. We got to go. We thank you for listening. You have a good night.